Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you guys are here today. If you are new to the channel, go ahead and click subscribe today. And if you are coming back and you're already subscribed, thank you for subscribing and for keeping up with me in the family. I'm very excited today because I am going to be talking about my birth story and you guys are going to get a chance to see Kaden. So yeah, I was due September 20th and I really didn't know if I was going to go into labor on my due date because leading up to my due date I was only dilated like 1 centimeter. So I told my doctor that I really didn't want to go over or past my due date because with my first son, Kyan, I was like 2 weeks overdue and it was just really miserable. But she was like, no, she said, we don't want to wait too long past your due date. So she said, I'll let you go a couple days if you're not in labor by your due date. I'll let you go a few days over and then we'll schedule another appointment to come back in and see if we want to go ahead and induce you or whatever. So I went in on my last appointment, my 40-week visit, and I still was only dilated like 1 to 2 centimeters. She said not much had happened. I didn't really progress. So she was like, we'll wait a few more days. This was on a Wednesday. So she was like, let's wait and see if you kick into labor over the weekend. And if you don't, I want you to come back in on Monday or Tuesday and we'll discuss whether we want to go ahead and induce. She said, and I could also try a procedure where I sweep your membranes and we'll see if that can kind of jumpstart things. She said that it may not work, but she's like, for some people it doesn't do anything, and for some people they go into labor within 24 hours of me doing it. So I was like, okay. So I talked it over with my husband and I was like, well, do you want to try this? And he was like, well, yeah, because it may not even do anything. So I was like, okay. So I went ahead and let her do the membrane sweep, and because I was already full term, I wasn't really worried about anything. And as she mentioned, it may do something and it may not. So we did the membrane sweep and she was like, just go ahead and go home and do your normal activities and try to do some walking. That may help bring the baby down a little more, because she said his head still was kind of high up and I didn't really progress. She's like, he hasn't really dropped down into the pelvis, so try to do some walking, maybe try to have sex. She told me all the regular natural things that you would do to bring the baby down. So I went home, did those things. I did walking and everything that she told me to do. I started doing household chores and stuff like that. And I started to notice that I started to have some contractions. So that afternoon around 4 o'clock, I started having contractions, but they weren't consistent and they ended up stopping. So I was like, okay, well, nothing really happened. So I laid down to take a nap. I got up and started to finish the laundry that I had already started. By 7:30-ish, the contractions started back up again. So I was like, I'm just going to wait and see if they're consistent for at least an hour and then kind of go from there. So by the time 8:30 came, they were coming every 10 minutes. So I was like, well, let me wait another hour and kind of see, because I said it has to be at least 2 hours before I can kind of tell if it's consistent. For another hour, they kept coming every 10 minutes. And by this time, they were getting pretty consistent and pretty strong. So I told my husband by this time it was about 10 o'clock. I was like, I'm having these contractions. They've been coming for the past 2 hours, like every 10 minutes. So I was like, and I really wasn't walking around while they were happening. I was just kind of sitting because I was folding clothes. So I was like, I don't really know if this is it, but I think that it is. So I was like, maybe we should go ahead and call. So we went ahead and called the hospital line that we were supposed to call to alert them that we may be in labor. So we called my sister. She came over to sit with the boys, and I actually had laid back down because I was like, I don't want to get turned away at the hospital if I go and I'm not far enough along. I don't want them to send me back home. But my husband was like, no, you need to get up. We need to go, because he's like, your contractions are getting too close. And he was like, I don't think they're going to send you back home. So I was like, okay. And as I got up to walk to the car, the contractions were just getting stronger and stronger. So by the time I was in the car, they were coming every about 4 to 5 minutes. So the whole way to the hospital, I tried to count how many contractions I was going to have within that 30-minute time it was going to take to get to the hospital. But I think we made it to the hospital in about 20-25 minutes. So by the time we got to the hospital, it was almost midnight, and they were doing the checking in process. There was nobody there except for me out in the hallway, and I was going through it in the hallway and hoping that I wasn't scared, because there was only one other girl there, so I was hoping I wasn't scaring her. I had to wait because they didn't have a room ready for me, so I was out in the hallway for, it seemed like forever. It was like a long period of time, and I was like, oh my God, somebody please come and get me out of this hallway. So I'm sitting there in the wheelchair, like just really going through it, laboring. So they finally get me back there, and it's a little after 12, I think, at this point. And so they hook me up to the IV and start to get everything started, hook me up to the monitor, and they're like, you're definitely in labor. You're about 3 centimeters at this point. And they're like, we're going to get you hooked up. Do you want an epidural? I'm like, yes, yes, yes. So they're like, okay, well, the anesthesiologist is here, but he has some other people in front of you, so it may take him a while to get to you. And I'm like, oh my God, So I'm sitting there going through the labor, and she was like, you have to get a whole bag of IV fluid before we will allow you to even get the epidural. So the IV, it just seemed like it was dripping so slow, and it was taking forever. And by this time, it was around 2 o'clock. So I was sitting there in labor for like another hour. So they only checked me that one time. I think that they assumed, because of my prior deliveries, that I was going to be there for a while before anything had happened. Plus my water hadn't broken. So they weren't checking me like they did previously. They only checked me that one time, and they kind of just left me alone. By this time, it was around 2:45, and she was like, okay, I promise you the anesthesiologist is coming, and I felt the contractions getting stronger and stronger and more sustained. They were like really long, like they weren't letting up, and it seemed like I wasn't really getting a break in between anymore. So I felt like something was happening, like I had never been in labor this intense before. So I was like, something is definitely going on. I was like, please, like I need the epidural. So he finally gets in there, I guess, at around 2:50-ish. It was almost 3 o'clock in the morning by the time he got there. So he does the epidural, and he's like, okay, you'll probably feel the next couple of contractions, and then the epidural will start to kick in, and you won't feel anything else. So my husband was like, okay, she's got the epidural. So he asked the nurse, he's like, is it cool for me to go ahead and go move the car now because she's got the epidural, And my nurse was like, yeah, she's going to be here for a while. Meanwhile, they still hadn't checked me again. So I had only been checked the initial time when I got to the hospital. So she was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and put your catheter in. And so my husband left, and she lifted up my leg to go ahead and put the catheter in. But she was like, first, let me hook you back up to the monitor. So she put the monitor back on me that was monitoring the baby's heartbeat, and I didn't hear anything. So that kind of startled me at first, but she just kept kind of doing what she was doing and trying to go ahead and insert the catheter. As she was trying to do that, she did notice that my water looked like it had broken. I had some leaking, and she goes, "Oh my God, do you feel that? Looks like your water broke." And I was like, "Really?" Because I'd never had that happen, on its own in any of my previous children. They always had to come and break my water. So I was like, "Oh my God," in my mind, I'm thinking I must be pretty far along if my water is broken on its own. So she was like, "Hold on." She said, "Let me call my colleague," because she said, "I can't position this monitor right." And she said, "I'm not getting a reading on your baby. I can't find the heartbeat." So I was like, "Oh God." So she called her colleague in. So another nurse came in, and she had her look at me. And she's like, "Does that look right to you? Is something down there?" And I could hear them kind of whispering, but they weren't saying anything to me.